Back now to Paris. Right now, none of the attackers have been confirmed as entering Europe as a refugee. There is suspicion, though, that one of them did pose as a Syrian refugee with an altered fake passport. Also, what we know at this time, we know that person strapped a suicide vest onto themselves and detonated it. In the United States, huge political back and forth over this, backlash growing against allowing Syrian refugees to enter this country right now. The House defied President Obama on Thursday, passing a bill to suspend the program allowing Syrian and Iraqi refugees into the United States pending security upgrades. You had many Republicans voting in favor of it. 47 Democrats. Joining me now, the lawmaker who proposed the bill. Joining me now, U.S. Congressman Richard Hudson. Thank you so much for being with me.
Great to be with you, Poppy. Thank you.
Congressman, I hope you can hear me, and if you can, please walk me through the key parts of this legislation, what specifically you want to see changed.
Well, thank you, Poppy. America is a very generous country. We've been welcoming the refugees. We have a long history of allowing folks to come here seeking asylum. But the problem arose when the FBI director a few weeks ago in testimony before Congress said that we can't properly vet most of these Syrian refugees. And so what we've done in the House of Representatives in a very bipartisan way, a 2/3 vote, said that we want to pause the program until we can put in place a vetting process that the FBI director feels comfortable with, and so that then the Homeland Security Secretary can also attest that these folks aren't a risk.
Just to be clear, it's not exactly what Comey, the FBI director, said. I mean, he said you only have so much information about people that are coming into this country. I think we might have it on the screen to pull up just to show our viewers. There are a number of things that refugees go through, a number of checks before they're allowed into this country. It's typically a 12 to 24-month process. For Syrians, because of security concerns, it takes even longer. And I want you to listen to what U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said about this issue just this week. I think, do we have the John? All right, let's play that sound from Secretary of State John Kerry.
Since 9/11, we have allowed 785,000 refugees to come to the United States of America, all vetted, all screened. Out of the 785,000, 12 people were found to perhaps be problematic with respect to potential terror, and they were arrested or deported.
What's your response to the Secretary of State?
Well, I don't take issue with what he's having to say, Poppy. But what the FBI director said in his testimony before Congress was, we can't properly vet these folks because if they haven't done anything to rise to the level to attract our attention so that we put them in our government databases, his quote was, we can check until the cows come home and nothing will show up. And what he said was that because you can't check with third parties in Syria, because in a normal background check, you'd go knock on the neighbor's door, you'd go talk to people that knew them, you'd go check with former employers. What he said was, we can't do that in Syria because, that neighborhood's been bombed out. That former business doesn't exist. And so because of the FBI director's concerns, all the House of Representatives is saying in a bipartisan way is let's pause until we can put a process in place so the American people can feel assured that we know who these folks are that are coming in.
So one of the parts of that process that you'd like to see enacted is you'd like for this to require the signature, the direct sign-off of the director of the FBI, the head of Homeland Security, head of National Intelligence, to sign off on every single refugee. So Jay Johnson, here's what Jay Johnson, Director of Homeland Security, had to say. This is a quote. Let me read it to you. This bill that has been posed is a bad bill because it seeks to micromanage the process in a way that is counterproductive to national security, to our humanitarian obligation, and the overall ability to focus on Homeland Security. He's saying, Congressman, that this actually risks Homeland Security to do what you'd like to see in your bill.
Well, I'd love to hear the Secretary's explanation for why he says that, because just a few weeks ago, testifying before Congress, he says the background information on these individuals is incomplete, and, quote, that's a real challenge. And so I'm not sure what his thoughts are now. I think it may have something to do with the fact that President Obama issued a veto threat, and they're now trying to sort of walk back after a very bipartisan vote in the House where Republicans and Democrats both said, we don't want to stop the flow of refugees. We don't want to say no Syrians. We don't want to limit one Christian or Muslim or any group. We want to be welcoming to refugees. But when the FBI director and in Jay Johnson's testimony before Congress said we can't put together complete background checks on a lot of these folks, and that's a real concern for the American people, Bobby.
The U.S. government, when you look at the data from the government, it shows that just under 2,200 Syrian refugees were admitted into the United States in recent years, looking from, I believe, 2011. More than 50% were children. Only 2% of those refugees are single men of what would be deemed, quote unquote, combat age. When you look at so many children and some of them widows as well, do you think there should be a differentiation in what you're proposing here? Or are you talking about across the board, even children included in this?
Well, my heart goes out when you see those children and those families trying to flee the violence in Syria. I have an 8-week-old baby boy at home, and when I see those children, I think of him. And so our heart goes out to those folks. And I think it's a different situation when you're dealing with a military-age male or with a child. If we're looking at a 7-year-old child trying to vet them, I think there's a different standard that the government already uses. And I was very careful when I wrote this legislation not to tell the FBI how to do their background checks. We're letting them do it to their standards. And so, for example, if I'm a naturalized Syrian who's come to America, I'm a citizen, and my mother is one of these refugees, I think it'd be a lot easier to vet her because you've got this connection than it would be a military-age male that we don't have any information on. And so in some cases, it'll be a lot easier, I think, to meet this test.
But to be clear, Congressman, what you're calling for in this legislation, this halt for now, would include children. Am I correct?
Well, as you said earlier, the vetting process sometimes takes 1 to 2 years. We're not saying stop the process. And so if there are refugees that are being vetted by the government now, they'll continue to vet those folks. And so I'm not sure there would be any kind of delay. I trust the folks at the FBI and Homeland Security to be able to put a process in place. But most of these refugees that are still abroad, about 60% are military-age males. And so there's a large group that it's going to be tough to put backgrounds together. But doesn't mean you stop the process.
All right, final question to you. Independent Senator Angus King of Maine has come forward. He, as you know, sits on the Intelligence Committee. He's come forward and he said it would be much harder for a terrorist to get into the country through the refugee program than as a tourist. Are you at all in agreement with him, and are you at all concerned that perhaps you're not focusing enough on the tourist side of this?
Well, I haven't seen the senator's comments, but I wouldn't disagree with what he has to say. There are other real threats to our Homeland Security that we need to be addressing. There's a bipartisan task force with the Homeland Security Committee that will be coming out with other legislation when we return Thanksgiving. Issues like visa waiver countries, folks who come here who don't need a visa because they come from countries that we trust. There's a real gap there, and that's something that Congress will be addressing. We need to address. It should be a bipartisan issue, and my hope is we'll address that too. But with my legislation, it was very narrowly focused and only wants to deal with the issue in Syria and Iraq because of the comments of the FBI director that there was a problem there. And so my bill's not a panacea. It's not the end of the process. It's simply the beginning.
I should note, you bring up, looking at the visa waiver program, there is a bill that is being formally proposed after the Thanksgiving holiday, the Feinstein-Flake bill, which would keep foreigners who have traveled to Syria or Iraq in the last 5 years from using the visa waiver program. So we'll be watching Capitol Hill as you guys debate that one. Thank you very much for your time, Representative. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Poppy. It was a pleasure.